So here we are for the final session of the day. They are all that stands between you and the cocktail hour. So thank you very much. We have two representatives of Millward Brown. We have Dr. Mario Simon, who's the CEO of Millward Brown Vermeer, and Adam Caplan, who's a partner based in London. Mario actually has flown over just for this, and he's flying back this evening, he told me. I don't know whether to thank him or burst into tears, but thank you for the effort. Another part of the WPP empire. The topic they're going to talk about today is all about brand valuation and creating brand value. It's one of those things that's notoriously difficult to quantify, but they think they found a way to do it. And certainly in these days of zero-based budgeting, with the focus on just keeping costs down, they'll probably touch on the comment that our previous speaker made about investing to create value rather than cutting costs. But I won't try and second guess what they're going to say. Adam will start off, and Mario will finish the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So my name is Adam Caplan, and I'm a partner with Millward Brown Vermeer, part of WPP, and I'm joined by our CEO, Mario Simon. One thing that separates us from a lot of our peers, namely the McKinsey, Bain, BCGs of the world, the Interbrand Profits of the world, is a passion for brands and branding, an understanding of how we can unleash the power of brands to drive growth. So I'll start with a story about when I first realized my own passion for brands and understood the power of brands. So I come from an automotive family. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, the former tire capital of the world. It was the headquarters of Goodyear, Firestone, General Tire, and Union Tire back in the 1980s. And Akron made the tires, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Youngstown made the steel, and Detroit made the cars. In the 1950s, my grandfather moved to the area, and he bought a small Ford dealership, Country Ford, in Warren, Ohio. And in 1958, the Mahoning River flooded and destroyed half of his inventory. And so overnight, he went from being a small, local, successful businessman to becoming a used car salesman on what used to be his car lot. And so my father didn't grow up with much. He grew up kind of hard. And after high school, he was very ambitious, very driven. He actually worked at Republic Steel in Youngstown, Ohio, to eventually pay his way through college and then through law school. Well, fast forward to 1996. My father is a successful attorney at this point, and he buys a white 1996 Cadillac Catera. And I apologize if there are any investors and General Motors in the audience. This was a terrible, terrible car. This was an Opel Electra that, in their infinite wisdom, they slapped a Cadillac badge onto and imported across the Atlantic to America. Now, Cadillac at that time was a very powerful brand in the US. It stood for innovation, for progress, for success. When you saw a celebrity, a rock star, the president riding in a car, you'd see them in a Cadillac. And so my father, one weekend, we drove down to Columbus, Ohio to see my grandfather. And my grandfather was in ailing health at this point. He wasn't doing so well. And we went to see him, and we had a good visit. We went out to the parking lot afterwards. My dad said, Mickey, I'd like to show you my new car. And as we took him outside, he saw my dad's new Cadillac, and he said, Bill, is that your Cadillac? And my dad said, yes. And my grandfather, I had never seen him cry in my entire life. He was an extremely stoic man. I come from a long line of stoic Russians. And all of a sudden, I saw tears starting to come down his cheeks. And I looked at my mother. I simply didn't get it. I didn't understand why he was crying. And I said, Mom, why is Grandpa crying? And she said, that car, your grandfather doesn't have much time left. And that car is a symbol that your father's going to be all right, that he's made it. And that moment, I realized that a car is more than engine displacement, wheelbase, comfort of the interior. The car is the brand that you put on the front of it. It's a message. It's a way of projecting your identity. It's a way of showing status. And people buy into something much bigger when they buy into brands. So as I mentioned, I, as well as my peers, have a passion for brands and branding. And in fact, we maintain the world's largest database of brand equity results. This is over 50,000 different local and global brands tracked every year, across 30 different countries. Over 1 million consumers and B2B customers ask for their perceptions and performance of the world's strongest brands. And each year, we take this brand equity data, we marry it with the financial data of the companies, and actually drive the BrandZ Top 100 global ranking of the world's most valuable brands. So a brand, just like any other productive asset, is able to drive cash flow. And if we can take the companies that own these brands and understand what % of their cash flows come from the brand itself rather than through operational things like trade and like your product development, we can actually pick apart what part of the value of the company comes from the brand itself rather than from the other intangible or tangible assets of the company. And so each year as we do this, we track those iconic brands. You'll recognize hopefully all of those names. Many of them have been around for decades. Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Marlboro. These are brands that have been at the forefront of brands and branding for a generation. There are 3 here that 20 years ago you probably never would have even heard of: Apple, Google, Microsoft. The brand landscape is dynamic. Brands are living assets that grow and change. And those brands that take advantage of opportunity are able to put themselves in a better place among their peers. And today, we're in an age of accelerated change, more change than any time in the past. By 2020, there'll be 212 billion connected devices. That is 27 connected devices for every person on the earth. Each of these connected devices is incredibly powerful. If we rewind back to 1963, John F. Kennedy went on TV and he told the world that by the end of the decade, we'll put a man on the moon. They did so with a computer that is 1/100 millionth the power of the iPhone 6 that is sitting in your pocket right now. So if a man with the vision and inspiration of John F. Kennedy was willing to get on TV and say, we'll put a man on the moon using those computers, imagine what you can do with the devices that are in your pocket and with the devices that are now connecting the world and redefining our industries. And already, they're really changing the marketing landscape and the industry landscape. Already we see new touch points. Burberry this year rolled out their digital runway. Rather than a traditional runway show, we actually beam this to you through your devices. Consumer banking used to be a very personal business. Today, it's run by apps, by solutions, by new ways of engaging the consumer. If we consider Amazon and their Echo device, again, like Siri, this is a personal concierge to bring the world of the internet to your fingertips and give you a total brand experience that it allows you to use all of your different media, all of your different digital properties. And finally, we think about Uber. Uber in 5 years has built the world's largest taxi network by 100-fold. To think this was even possible 20 years ago would be unbelievable. And so we're ushering in what many have called the fourth industrial revolution. The theme of this year's World Economic Forum actually was the fourth industrial revolution. And now we are starting to truly unleash the power of the internet. And it's now integrated into all of our industries. We talked about automotive a moment ago. The driverless car is a reality in the next decade. A driverless car that doesn't have any accidents. You realize that car accidents are the #1 leading cause of preventable death each year around the world. Think about the change that will come to the insurance industry, to the organ donation and healthcare industry as a result of 0 car accidents. If we talk about your industry, if we think about finance, blockchain, distributed ledger technologies have the potential to undermine a lot of the roles of financial intermediaries in the economy. So across the landscape, we see accelerated change, we see incredible disruption, we see more dynamism than we ever have. And there are those companies that seize upon, there we go, thank you. There are those companies that seize upon, this change and see the opportunity in it, and there are those who cling to their current business models. If we look back to 1961, the average tenure of a company in the S&P 500 was over 60 years. Today, that number is 18 years. Companies are being replaced faster than ever before. Mergers are swallowing companies into new conglomerates, and the pace of change is accelerating. And at a time like this, in what the US military calls VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, we have 2 options. We can continue to invest for growth and invest for opportunity in the future, or we can be scared by this change and instead become very short-term. Think about today's delivery. And that's exactly what we see happening. CapEx levels this year at the lowest level since 2010. As a percent of cash on balance sheets, it's the lowest level since 1930, the first year of the Great Depression. We see across the corporate landscape that there's a lot of pullback. that we're focusing on today's delivery rather than investing for the future. And so what are we doing with all that cash and the low interest rates, the cheap debt that we have? It's being used to fuel M&A. Another record-setting year last year, $4.1 trillion worth of M&A volume. And this is mostly focused on cost cutting. We merge industries, we strip out cost, we look for the next target. Already companies, platform companies like Valiant, like ABI, have created a business model out of becoming a serial acquirer, of finding the right platform with great management, acquiring a company, finding efficiency, and going on to the next target. And as we've seen with Valiant today and in the last several weeks, this can start to run into trouble over time. Because what we find is actually that if you look at a 10-year investment horizon and what drives total shareholder return, yes, margin, multiple, free cash flow play a part, but 71% of total shareholder return over a 10-year horizon comes from revenue growth. So brands that grow, companies that grow top line, are able to drive outperformance in the long term. And our belief, strongly, is that brands can help you drive that top line growth. So as we mentioned, great brands, brands that form an emotional connection with the consumer, are able to drive consumer choice, are able to justify price premium, and they are living assets that stay with the company from now to the future. So if we look at a portfolio of the Brand Z top 50 stock, or top 50 brands, so this is from our brand equity database, the strongest brands. And we look at their performance relative to the S&P 500 over a 10-year horizon, they've outperformed the index 2x. So brands are able to build strong top-line growth and drive outperformance. Now we have to acknowledge that although we want to invest for the long term, many investors, many shareholders are becoming increasingly impatient. The average shareholding now on the NYSE and the FTSE is less than 1 year. In fact, by some measures today, with the advent of high-frequency trading, it's as short as 27 seconds. So obviously, there's intense pressure on corporates to deliver today, sometimes at the expense of the long term. And we're demanding accountability, as we should, that when we see efficiency and ways to drive efficiency in these companies, that we put pressure on the boards in order to realize them. At the same time, there's internal pressure as well for these corporate managers. If we think about 30 years ago, you set a 5-year strategy, and it's very easy to maintain. You received monthly performance data from the business, you had your North Star, and you're able to maintain your view of the market. Today, these corporate managers receive a new email every moment of every day that helps them question some aspect of their view of how the market is evolving. With SAP portals and other business intelligence platforms, they're able to see their performance in real time. It is very hard to maintain a long-term horizon and a long-term view. What we found, though, is that actually brands, in addition to driving long-term growth, can also be a very effective lens for short-term investment. So in our brand equity database, we did an analysis to understand that 75% of brands that grow their awareness relative to their competitors year over year grow their value share. Comparing that to brands that don't grow their awareness relative to competitors, only 19% of them will grow their value share. So if you spend behind the brand, you put marketing investment behind the brand, you'll drive greater awareness and you will drive increases to value share. So the trick becomes, how do we choose the right horses to bet upon? These corporate managers need to become better portfolio managers than the shareholders themselves. And so we've worked with a global FMCG who operates across over 100 countries, multiple categories, to do exactly this exercise. And we created a capital allocation system that took into account 3 things. Market opportunity, so what markets do we expect to grow? What consumer segments in those markets are growing? Are they right for our portfolio? Do we expect there to be increased economic growth and more pricing power into the future in those economies? We look at the brand opportunity. What assets do we have in that market? How strong are our brands? Do they have a strong purpose at their heart? Is there strong awareness behind them? Do they have the right product portfolio to compete? And we look at the media effectiveness. In some markets, it's much easier to break through. $1 spent on media is much more effective in driving awareness growth and driving brand growth. And when we put this all together and we looked across the 3 billion pounds of annual spend that they do on marketing investment, we were able to identify 180 million pounds worth of profit potential, unrealized, but realizable through a better allocation each year. That's 6 percentage points, 600 basis points of better ROI should you be betting on the right horses by using your brands as a lens to understand which are most efficient in growing awareness and growing value share over time. So we've seen now that brands can be very effective in the short term at helping us guide our investment allocation within the company. The other question then is, if we focus on the short term, can we also deliver the long term? So I'll turn over to Mario, who will take the long-term view.
Thank you, Adam. Can you hear me? So I'm going to focus on what is the learnings that we've found in terms of building long-term value from brands. But before I go into that, I'll talk a little bit about my background. So I started my life in academia. I was doing economics and then behavioral economics and game theory, which was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about human behavior. And I thought I knew quite a bit about it until this creature came along and challenged absolutely everything I know about human behavior and consumer behavior. For those of you who have kids, and especially daughters, I definitely imagine that you understand what I'm talking about. Now, the world that Penelope will live in is going to be a very different world than the world that we grew up in, as Adam was saying, in terms of connectivity, in terms of disruption. And one point I wanted to make about what Adam said is not only it's the most tumultuous and high volatility time ever, but especially in non-war times, that is actually quite impressive in terms of the sea of change that's happening. So on that, we started thinking about, well, how do we understand, given the Brand Z database, given our relationships with our clients, given our relationships with the key problems that they ask us, so where do I play, how do I win, why do I exist, why am I falling out of the S&P late 500, why is my competitor doing better than I am? And we looked at a lot of data, and we collected a lot of extra data. So these are three pieces of work that we've done over the last couple of years. One with Jim Stengel, who was the CMO of P&G, so the guy who was allocating most marketing investment than anybody else in the world at the time. And we really wanted to understand with him what actually creates disproportionate brand value like over time. And so we have findings from that. Then we went into the question of how do great marketing organizations organize in a world that is changing all the time? So how do they create that agility and flexibility that is necessary for everyone to succeed? And that was published last year in the Harvard Business Review, which was the most downloaded article ever for HBR. And finally, this year, not published yet, so this is a mock-up of what we hope it will look like, or something like it could look like, which is then to understand how consumer centricity and the North Star of consumer centricity helps companies really look at the long run. So Insights 2020 is a massive study that is the first of its kind to really understand across markets and across industries how organizing for consumer centricity can really help brands grow value over a long period of time. We did qualitative interviews with large company and small company CEOs, CMOs, heads of insights, head of analytics. And then we did a mass-scale quantitative study to really understand the behaviors and what these companies do differently.
We're living in exciting times. Globalization, urbanization, new economies, and new technologies are driving huge business and marketing changes. The technology is empowering consumers, more informed, expecting transparency, demanding accountability, and challenging growth. Growing amounts of data, yet often lacking true insights. Today's insights and analytics world is changing at the speed of light, forcing business, marketing, and insights leaders to answer fundamental business questions. Are we truly consumer-centric? What insights do we require to guide our strategy? And how do we organize to win?
So the first finding, the most important, I guess, for people in this room and for a lot of these brands that we looked at, is that consumer centricity does indeed drive disproportionate revenue growth. So if we take the example of or the chart that Adam was talking about, which is that revenue growth is the key to sustainable total shareholder return, consumer centricity is actually at the heart of that, with extremely high correlations. And the rest of the presentation will talk about what findings we see there. So we looked at a very simple question, and sometimes the big insights come from very simple questions, which is if we take the responses of executives in terms of how they're organized and how consumer-centric they are, what separates winners from losers? So before we go into the detail of the quantitative, first I want to give you a sense of what people said when we interviewed them on a qualitative basis. So everyone looked at opportunities. So this sea of change of insights and analytics and data actually has a lot of opportunities that were shared. Behavioral data. So the ability to really access data that is quite different from ever before. And taking that data and taking it into action for all touch points, and then personalizing the experience that the consumer has. And finally, and that's true more for overperformers, that actually everything is linked to a brand purpose, and I'll talk a bit more about that. Then we looked at challenges and what are the challenges that are common across. So especially for underperformers, what we saw is that they're still mired by things like internal silos, bureaucracy, legacies, structures, and so forth and so on. Whereas the overperformers actually have been able to orchestrate above that. They understand that silos are necessary. They understand that they were created for a reason. They have learned how to orchestrate around that. And now it's about actually making sense of the data, the 80-20 rule of being able to find the insight and not having to boil the ocean. And really, another opportunity that they found was around what we call recruiting whole brain people. So for the first time, we heard this word everywhere in the interviews we did with senior executives. So the dimensions of consumer centricity are three. One is under the banner of total experience. The second one is under consumer obsession, and the third one is the insights engine. And the insights engine is the ecosystems that these companies create of data and access to the data and the capabilities they have to be able to harness the power of those data. And the drivers behind those for the total experience is purpose-led, data-driven customization, and touchpoint consistency. So those companies that do extremely well and drive revenue growth are able to do that seamlessly. Around obsession with the consumer, it's about embraced by all. And a large client of ours, which is AB InBev, really does that extremely well. So embraced by all, really focusing on the consumer while at the same time doing the great reorganizations that they do. Making it a leadership priority, collaborating, and experimenting on new ideas. And finally, the insights engine is about the leading role of insights and analytics in the company and connecting all the data and unlocking it and building those whole brain capabilities on the future. So let's take a few of these examples. I know that I'm between you and cocktail hour, so I'll give you a couple of examples and then we can open it up for questions. So purpose-led, overperformers, 80% of them said that they link everything they do to a brand purpose. Underperformers, only 32%. So let's look at what that really means and how we actually extract that and understand the steps to get there. So if we take an example of another client, Red Bull is about uplifting mind and body. So that starts with brand communications and being able to have comms that really resonate with the new consumer who is much more purpose-led than older consumers. Then going into the integrated the marketing mix, including innovation, then being a North Star that actually leads to transforming the whole company as to what the purpose means and what does it mean to uplift mind and body. And finally, a societal movement. In this case, for Red Bull, is creating a whole category of energy drinks that did not exist before them.
Went to Italy, came across the phenomenon, the ubiquity of the Italian coffee bar, and saw this sense of community and humanity, and said, we're in the wrong business. I said many times now that we're not in the coffee business serving people, but we're in the people business serving coffee. People want to be part of something larger than themselves. We long for human connection, and the human connection, conversation, the sense of humanity, sense of community that exists in Starbucks has proven to be a real asset for the company.
So this is a very good example that talks about how purpose of connecting people was a true North Star for Starbucks, and the whole innovation platform that they created was exactly about that. And also, when Starbucks went astray and they started becoming much more transactional and opening too many stores, not really paying attention to the experience, Schultz came back and actually culled quite a few underperforming stores and brought the company back to that connection with a purpose. So it's not only about innovation and about leading us in good times, but it's also helping us rethink about what we're trying to do if we fall off the track, and we all do at some point or another. So if we look at Brand Z and the top 100 brands and look at the purpose-led ones, you will see that 300% brand value increase in the last 10 years for the purpose-led ones. The average is 100% brand value increase, obviously, because the actual market is moving. And the non-purpose-led brands, 67%. So clear indication from the markets that actually this, over the long run, is recognized by shareholder value creation. And what is a purpose? A purpose is the why a brand exists and what it serves that is bigger than just selling a service or a product in the present moment. Then building total experiences. So if we look at overperformers, 73% creating experiences based on data-driven insights, and 64% driving consistency along all touch points versus 31 and 29 of underperformers. Clearly, the total experience is a very, very powerful tool that allows to translate the purpose into an experience for the consumer. And we define it in two dimensions. One is the depth of the experience. So really, how well does Amazon know me, for example? So that's a very good example of a consumer-led insight there. But also the breadth. So how consistent is it over a large set of platforms? So Disney does a fantastic job in that. And if you take Nike, where they're taking the brand, that's exactly the combination of those two to be able to also provide breadth and depth on the experience. Total experience inspires us to innovate and stretch our brands way beyond our core. And a lot of brands have this issue today. They've learned how to make money on a specific category. And how do you make the category not become the prison of your growth? And so if you think about extensions and where the brand can play, the more purposeful it is, the more able it is to create new categories. So if you think about AB InBev going from the core of beer to malt-based, cocktail-based drinks which have done extremely well. And also if you take Red Bull going from the energy drink category that they created to the experience-led categories that they are creating now with media opportunities. And finally, and this is the last piece of it, and of course there's tons and tons of data and case studies behind this, so anyone who wants to deep dive on this, please feel free to reach out. is a whole brain culture of and. So what we see for a lot of large companies, whether it's telecom or banks or FMCG, is that they're very good at creating value in their core, but they need to expand beyond their core to be able to grow in an environment that totally, as an economy, is decelerating in terms of growth, but accelerating in terms of change. And so that culture of and is very powerful. 71% of overperformers tell us that whole brain thinking is a critical capability that they either need to hire or they need to develop. So I don't know if you saw the article in the New York Times about the smart creatives that Google is trying to develop, but that's all about talent management and how that happens. And the marketing piece of the organization, I think, in many ways is the last part of the organization that has escaped linearization. And so accountable, as Adam talked about it, and consumer-centric, as I talked about, marketing can actually be a very, very powerful source of talent in order to reinvent and rethink organizations as they go through this change. And of course, structure always follows strategy, so it is really about how we structure a business to put marketing and the principles of new marketing into the heart of the business for growth. And what we've done with many of our clients is to say, okay, well, if today this is the scorecard that you are, and this is how consumer-centric you are, what would it look like if you close the gap on the areas that are not working out or where you fall down, and we are able to create business cases that not only tell us how well they've done to date with revenue growth, but also how much revenue growth can exist for the business if they close those capability gaps. So in closing, I'd like to leave you with a thought, which is that brands can help us deliver in the short term and in the long term. And they do that by driving profit growth immediately in the short run, by being a compass on how to actually optimize investments over the portfolio, as Adam said, in shaping new territories and being able to expand beyond the core into areas that are profitable and interesting, and finally by creating agile organizations through hiring and developing whole brain people. Thank you.
So we've got time for 12 minutes or so of questions. Right in the middle there.
Yes, I remember across the years that some of the top brands in your survey were consumer brands. You have Coca-Cola now and I think McDonald's just making it to the top 10, but they used to be up there at the top and other brands as well. Why do you think that staples brands are less valuable or say don't rank as good as they used to?
Do you want to take it?
Sure. So I think when you look at a brand valuation, there's always two pieces. There's the financial performance of the company itself, and what percentage of that financial performance is driven by the brand. And obviously, we've seen extremely strong financial performance from some of those tech companies you've seen at the top of the list today, from Microsoft, from Google, from Apple. Now, they've also been built around very strong brands. So those companies have very scalable assets. If we think about Google, they have a search engine which is extremely scalable, and they have a brand to back it up and scale with it. So it's a very efficient model that's been very, very strong in, one, driving great financial performance, and two, driving a very strong connection with the consumer through the brand. When you look to the consumer brands in the list, they're still very strong. They have not had the potential to grow at the rates that some of the new generation tech firms have over the last several years. So it's not so much that they're falling off, it's just a matter of them not able to grow it at the pace of some of their peers.
Next question. Right down at the front. The tall guy.
I appreciate you going to Columbus. I went to Michigan, but I'll still talk to you. It's an inside joke. I'd like to turn to consumer brands a little bit more in depth if I could. Considering the distribution that consumer brands have to face in trying to get their products out in front of the consumer. And I appreciate what you've said, I found it fascinating. But I don't know how that translates into the financial side of the balance sheet or the financial side of the company, meaning its balance sheet, so I can afford the slotting fees I need to force a product off the shelf, no matter how superior I think or I test my product is. I'm not driving Coke off the shelf. Pepsi, I mean, give me the third largest brand of cola, and you can't name it and it doesn't matter. So when I have a market that's really a market that's mature, how do I get to grow that market? I know I try different flavors, I try innovation, I try all this, but I still got to get the bloody thing on the shelf. How does that work into your brand value? It used to be, get 10 people, go to the store manager, tell them they want to get the product, and he'll make sure it's on the shelf for you. But there's got to be a better way. I'm more concerned with how you measure that, how you measure the value of a Coke that may have trouble just growing or face obstacles that are out of their control.
Yeah, so in the Brand Z database, distribution is a key driver. And so what we're able to do is to take all the drivers of choice, which includes brand drivers in terms of preference, differentiation, meaningfulness, and so forth and so on, as well as distribution, pricing, which is another one, just as distribution is, and being able to deconstruct where the value comes from. And so there's different brands that value comes from, like different components, whether it is distribution or pricing or availability. So that's how the model.
The strategy used by Sam's Cola. Walmart and Sam's are going to drive Coke off their shelf, put in their own brand, and it wasn't a Rambo brand. Okay, they were going to get equal market share because they had the distribution. Maybe they didn't have the product. Maybe they couldn't force through the consumer perception. There's theses have been written as to how that's there. How does that square with what your thesis is? Or am I missing something?
You're not missing like anything. I think the whole point is that different brands are able to create value in different ways. So I'll give you an example that I love talking about. And again, it's not a Brand Z top 100 brand because it's only in the US for now. But if you take Method, for example, Method. So Method is a company that creates cleaning products, basically. So it's the only brand that has been able to create floor cleaner and facial cleaner at the same time in the same brand. And that's because it stands for something that is much bigger than either a Clorox-like brand or a Nivea-like brand. And that kind of sort of creating your own space through something that is bigger than yourself, which is what Starbucks, by the way, did a long time ago in the coffee business, is exactly the way that you can sort of rethink value creation in the industry. Burt's Bees did exactly the same, and P&G eventually bought the brand for a very high premium. So creating a new space where people can actually really operate in very new ways, new business models, is the FMCG equivalent of an Uber, which is disrupting a category like taxis. Yes? Oh, sorry. You were the moderator.
No, you take it away.
Robert Ottenstein from Evercore ISI. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the volatility you see in your rankings. So is there an increasing volatility in terms of brands going up and down your rankings? And is it harder or easier today to build a strong and lasting brand than 10, 20 years ago?
I think there are a lot of angles to that question. In terms of the actual volatility of brand values, they tend to be less volatile than the financial value of the firms which own them, simply because consumer perceptions are longer to change and longer to build than the short-term financial performance of a firm. Now, at the same time, we do see greater volatility today than we did in the past, as there is obviously new upstarts who are able to scale quicker and come into the rankings. And I think more importantly, it is harder to build a strong brand today than it has been in the past as well. We're obviously now fighting for airtime. And more importantly, the actual touch points, marketing methods, vehicles that we use to build a brand are changing very significantly. If we think about the way that digital is transforming the actual ad agency side of things, the marketing side of things, we are now devolving the marketing message. So many people are talking about participatory marketing. It used to be that you had a message, you blasted it out to your customers or your consumers via a 60-second commercial. Now you're creating participatory things through digital and through other means to try to actually devolve the message and allow them to create their relationship with the brands. So obviously these new media, have new challenges to overcome for companies, and it's difficult for incumbents to build brands in that environment. But at the same time, it creates opportunities for those who are able to do it better. So yes, more volatility today, less volatile than the financial performance of companies, but obviously a new game that everyone needs to play.
But what we do see is that in the past, people would enter the rankings at 99, and then they would go 97, and then they would go 90, and so forth and so on. And today, you have brands that come into the rankings at level 64 or something. So when Facebook sort of took off, it created sufficient brand value to actually get it to, I think it was number 65 from the get-go. So the ones who do it successfully can go up the rankings very, very fast, which is not the same as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then just tied to that, how do you, when you're working with companies and get them to kind of think through capital allocation decisions in terms of buying brands as opposed to building or enhancing brands, has that discussion changed over time, that dialogue changed over time, and does the M&A side, the purchasing now perhaps become more attractive given how hard it is to actually build brands?
So the answer is yes. There's a lot of advisory that we're asked to do on the M&A side. I think the how of the acquisition actually also has changed. So even quite aggressive investors are expecting the treatment of the acquisition to be much more carefully managed to preserve brand value than it used to be. So in the past, brand value used to be thought of as something that cannot go down. So let's just cost rationalize the thing for operational efficiency. And that used to be the mindset. Now more and more investors in brands actually understand that the way that you handle the autonomy of the acquisition or the things that made it great are actually things that can actually take it down very quickly. And so it's a much, much more autonomously managed and carefully managed asset once you buy it. Because if you think about it, what Adam just said, in the past it was a one-way street. So brand perceptions would not change very quickly because the brand was talking to the consumer. Today, the inside out and the outside in view with all sorts of social media being able to go on both sides, there's no such thing as we manage the brand internally and we manage the perception externally. That actually has gone away. So you can go up as fast as you can go down.
Got one last question over there.
Yes. I'm a big believer in brand purpose, and I do applaud your presentation, the way you put it together. I thought that was very compelling. Having said that, what I do observe with many or some FMCG companies is actually that they go a bit less strategic and go a lot more in a volatile way in terms of how they execute their communication. What I mean by that is, for example, even Coca-Cola with their liquid and linked strategy, where it's all about content management, where it's about storytelling, but about shareability, about provoking conversations and all of this. I wonder, where a brand purpose and brand strategy still holds true. And I'm curious in your views about, in the new digital channels and all the digital touch points, how should FMCG companies and brands cope with all of this? On one hand, being purpose-led, on the other hand, dealing with, yes, let's call it storytelling and liquid content creation.
Right. So I'll let Adam speak about Coke because I know that he's American and he loves it, so he's the right guy to talk about it. But from my perspective, when I advise clients, what I say is that the more complex the environment is for your brand, and the more complex it always becomes with the new levels of content, the more focused you have to be on your purpose, because the easier it is to diffuse it and lose it. And so to me, purpose is not a difficult thing to create in a vacuum. So I can call a couple of people, creative people, financial people, and so forth and so on, in a room and come up with a purpose for a brand. That's sort of not difficult to do, and understand the history, understand living it, and making the decisions. For example, like Howard Schultz made, or the decisions that Tim Cook is making for Apple. That is the difficult ones. So it is the ability to say no to a lot of great opportunities that come your way when a brand actually is very powerful, and that the French brand owners do that extremely well. If you look at luxury, whenever luxury goes wrong, it is when people say, well, I have a great name, Louis Vuitton, I have a great name, the Gucci, let me just monetize it. And of course, it's very enticing and exciting, and you lose it in a second. And I think that French luxury companies have done a very good job at actually maintaining that very, very powerful ability to say no to a lot of opportunities that can in the short run be interesting, but in the long run destroy value.
I think, so there's kind of, from an academic angle, there's two prevailing lines of thought right now in marketing and brand building. One is Jim Stengel and his book Grow, and another is Byron Sharp, who's is now in vogue with Diageo, with Mars and many in the sector. Both of them believe, though, very strongly in two related topics. So Stengel talks about purpose, aligning everything you do to that purpose, and Sharp talks about consistency. So one of his great examples actually is Coca-Cola and the consistency of their iconography. That color red, that logo, you recognize anywhere on the earth among just about any person you speak with. And the consistency of that branding is what drives greater cut-through in terms of their advertising and their awareness building, and creates a more efficient asset. So I think most people do believe that consistency, whether via brand purpose or whether via simply consistency of iconography, is very effective in creating more efficient brands.
And it's not an either or. I think really great brands do both.
Excellent. So, I have to say, Mario, I had an idea of what the presentation would be about, but it was more than I was expecting, and it was an eye-opener and very, very thought-provoking.
Thank you.
I hadn't finished the praise, but if you want to judge whether it was worth coming over and flying straight back from the point of view of satisfaction here in the room, then it was worth it. And I hope you don't lose too much sleep through jet lag. Thanks very much. Mario's got to run off and get his plane, but Adam's staying around and his colleague Travis, so we're going to be heading down to the cocktail hour, so you can ask some more questions there. We'll obviously have McDonald's people at the cocktail hour, and I've sent an email to all the IR people around saying come along to the cocktail hour. I think Richard Joyce from Reckitt will be there. Maybe a couple of others will join us. So please, if you've got time, head down to the cocktail hour, and we'll see you there. And thanks again, guys. We'll be back.